Hey, what's up, guys? And as always, good to be back with you. We are on the verge of some sort of snowmageddon here in the United States, especially in the southern part of the country. So if you are here, I hope that you're doing well and that you're not freezing to death. And if you're up north, you can go ahead and laugh at us all that you want. Of course, we're coming back. We're going to play some good old ice hockey, which is what we really should be doing. No, we haven't started the game yet. Let's go ahead and get this going. So we're going to be Canada again, and somebody was telling me, wasn't someone telling me to play against the USSR or something like that? I don't know. We'll change the speed to 3 since someone got upset that it was at 1, so we'll see how we do, though I can't make you any promises. What we're going to do here is we're going to do all shrimp guys except for the one medium guy. And that's what we're going to do. We're just going to sort of like toggle this up like one at a time and kind of go through this in our project. If you're new to this and don't know what's going on, don't worry. I barely know what's going on either. Basically, the idea here is that we're going to just sort of like have a good time and, you know, play some ice hockey. That's basically it. This isn't to scientifically prove anything other than that it's fun to play ice hockey. And it really is. I think I just pushed past or shoot when I wanted to pass. Alright, I'll go over and get this here. There we go. That's the right button. So, yeah, I was telling a friend here today that, you know, the funny thing about this winter storm, as I've been reading about it, is that the winter storm is definitely, it includes like some Canadian wind. And so I'm wondering if this isn't like, you know, part of Canada's revenge on the United States after the United States president and his comments and all that stuff. You know, maybe this is sort of like another part of 1812, right? Where Canada decides to use extreme winter weather to punish the United States and to get the United States to do what it wants. So maybe that's really what's going on, and that we're just misinterpreting this, misunderstanding what this is really all about and all that stuff. Anyway, who knows? That's definitely the way you can think about it. All right, there we go. I tell you, these shrimpy guys are pretty fast, aren't they? Anyway, so the news here on the channel is that there will be a video tomorrow, which is a good thing. We're going to do a video on the 1919 Stanley Cup, which is a video that has a whole bunch of videos about it on YouTube, but I want you to watch mine anyway because it's going to be better. Certainly it's going to be better than the way that we're playing here. We're not playing very well. But you do want to watch this video. I have done quite a bit of original research into old newspapers, and there's a lot of cool stuff going on with the series that I think most people kind of ignore. A lot of stuff that you may or may not realize that was happening at the time. I'm certain that there are probably hockey historians out there who are going to look at like the research I do and stuff and laugh at it. But having said that, like so often the research, you know, turns into sort of like, you know, this person did this thing and so on and so forth, and there's not so much thinking about like how this really matters and kind of like the impact that all this stuff has had and all of that. The coolest thing about the 1919 series is that the series was played under 2 different sets of rules. So the old Pacific Coast Hockey Association had older rules in one sense. There were 7 players on the side instead of the 6 that we're accustomed to, so 6 skaters and 1 goalie. Yet at the same time, they also had rules that were a little bit newer because you could do a forward pass. So back in the early days of hockey, you couldn't make a forward pass. All the passes back in the really, really early days were backwards only. Now, it wasn't necessarily the case you had to pass like backwards rugby style. That's what a lot of us think of when we read that. That's not really true. Like you could pass, you know, forward as long as the guy you were passing to was behind the puck. And that's one of the things that people tend to misunderstand and forget. Now, it's kind of hard to understand these rules as well. The reason why it's hard to understand is because the newspapers at the time didn't exactly do a very good job of writing about them. So, like, when I'm looking for sources for this stuff, I'm like, well, I don't know what the rules actually are because I'm just basically looking and seeing what other people have written about it, you know. I do searches in the newspapers and can't really find much. The newspapers would make like direct references to things like, you know, oh, well, this refers to like this team wasn't able to do the center ice pass well or something. I'm like, so what is the center ice pass? And it takes a while to figure out. And you're like, well, the center ice pass really is probably this pass you could do in the neutral zone that went forward, right? Anyway, it's pretty interesting stuff because so the old NHA, which was before the NHL, had been a 7 players a side league up until I think right before it collapsed, if I understand right. And so a lot of the players on like Montreal in this series like should have at least at some point in time played 7-a-side, but it didn't help them much because every time the two teams played under the 7-a-side rules, Seattle ended up scoring 7 goals and just dominating the game. But in the end, I won't spoil too much of the video for you, but in the end, the 5th game and the final game, really final game of the series, ended up being played under the NHL rules, which meant that Montreal was able to win. It was a fascinating series with 2 massive overtime games, and this is back in the like real men's days of ice hockey. So this is back when you weren't going to like go off the ice for a substitute or for lines or whatever. Like these guys would play like almost the entire game, like 100%. These guys were hardcore. I mean, hockey wasn't a hardcore sport back in like 1919. You think that is hardcore today? You do not know. These guys had like no helmets on. There are stories about guys like having these big gashes on their head. They still go out and skate, right? And part of the problem is that the teams had like no players, right? You had a team, you'd have like 8 players. I think Seattle only has 8 players for the entire season. So if you only have 8 players, you can't, you can't like, feel the burn of, all the time on the ice or whatever. You've got to keep going, So the 4th game of the series ended up a scoreless draw, which is really interesting because scoring actually was pretty high back in those days, but not in that final game of that series, or that 4th game of that series. Nobody could get a goal. And so they played overtime. They played 2 different overtimes, 10 minutes each, and there was no score. And the Seattle manager was absolutely furious afterwards because the ref said it was going to be a tie. This was, I believe, according to the NHL rules. I think that's what they were using for this game. And so the Seattle manager was really, really upset about this, and basically, voiced his displeasure and all this stuff. There was a big argument. The fans stuck around as they argued for like a half hour, and then finally, the refs prevailed and all this stuff. But the fascinating thing about this is that the Seattle players ended up like on the ice like exhausted and like collapsing because they had played so hard. And there was a key player, I forget his name, I wrote in the script, I wrote somewhere, but the key player that they had ended up with this like big gash on his forehead and stuff like that. I mean, this stuff is just crazy. It's absolutely amazing. And you have like, you just don't know what this is like until you sit down and you really read it and you go through it. The leagues themselves are interesting, and I go into this in the video quite a bit, right? There were only 3 teams in the NHL that year, and only 3 teams in the PCHL as well. And in the NHL season, one of the 3 teams, the Toronto team, ended up folding before the end of the season. I mean, it was just different times. So I'll put it to you this way. So for the other project that I have, that 93-94 season, today I was reading an old issue of the Sporting News from that time period with the NHL preview. And they're talking there about how, hockey was having a hard time figuring out, or the NHL, I should say, was having a hard time figuring out how to best position itself and advertise itself to the U.S. market and stuff like that, which is all really interesting. But, like, you think it was having a hard time, like, in 1992, it was having a really hard time in 1919 when, like, you kept having teams that would just go under, like, all of a sudden. And, I mean, it's amazing to me, but you would have leagues that only had, 3 teams. The NHL at the end of 1919 only had 2 teams, and of those 2 teams, only 1 team actually had an arena because Montreal's arena burned down in April. So, like, I mean, it's just, like I said, it's just crazy. It's crazy. The more you read about it, the more you're like, how did they do this? How did this league stay alive? But it happened somehow, and it remains to this day, and it's all part of like the legend, history, and all this other stuff. So, anyway, that's the big story about hockey in 1919. Absolutely fascinating period of time in the history of the sport, and one that we don't talk, I think, enough about. Now, it would be much nicer if we had like some sort of video or something. I mean, even finding like photography from games back then is impossible. I've been looking everywhere. Can't find any photos from any games. There were no hockey cards in 1919, so this is after the old days of the cigarette cards, and what would that be, like the 1910, 1911, that sort of thing. Oh, I almost got a goal there, sorry. There was nothing like that, unfortunately, in 1919, which is really kind of, actually, it's kind of odd and surprising, because the truth is that there was a lot of attention paid to ice hockey in those days, especially in the Canadian newspapers. I'm not just talking about the major cities. I'm not just talking about Montreal and Toronto and Vancouver and so on. I'm talking about like parts of Nova Scotia and stuff. Everywhere you look, there were people talking about this sport. I mean, the NHL at that time probably only had, I'm guessing, like at most like 35 players, and that's probably an overestimate, right? But these were like the most famous hockey players anywhere, right? So anyway, pretty interesting stuff. Of course, you can't talk about 1919 without thinking about Joe Hill, the guy for the Canadians who ended up passing away as a result of the influenza, which was a definite problem. It's interesting though, because you don't see any articles about people saying, oh, we shouldn't have, we shouldn't be playing this series or whatever because of the sickness that's spreading and stuff. In fact, even articles about the influenza are really, really hard to find from that period of time, which really surprised me. You can find them in newspapers in Canada and in the United States, but they tended to be reserved for the back pages of the newspapers instead of being at the front, which is where you would expect them. So anyway, that's the story about all of that. You can see more of this in this video that should be out tomorrow morning, assuming that I'm able to edit it and shut up when I make these videos. I do hope that you appreciated this video as we play ice hockey. I thought that it was a lot of fun to play, and I'm glad that I'm able to win, despite the fact that I was talking about something completely unrelated. I'm hoping that you're having a good time. Like I said, if you're impacted by the storm, please stay inside. Stay inside and watch some of my videos while you're at it, and find something that you like. If you're not affected by the storm, then go out and have a ball for the rest of us. I know I'm going to be hunkering down. I'm going to make a lot of content this weekend, that's for sure. Talk to you guys later. Bye.